evening and welcome to Cafe Cabaret. Cafe Cabaret is produced by Francis DiMenno. Tonight we present The Wrong Hero in the Rock and Roll Hall of Shame. The second portion of our presentation will be the unmaking of Sgt. Pepper. Incidental music for the first portion of our show by Jeffrey Gagnon. Lyrics by Francis DiMenno. Hello, I'm the Wrong Hero. And today's segment, excuse me, I gotta turn this down. There we go. I'm the Wrong Hero, and today's segment concerns what I call the Rock and Roll Hall of Shame. As you may or may not be aware, the prestigious Rock and Roll Hall of Fame recently, that is in Cleveland, Ohio, recently nominated 500 songs which they claim were the 500 most influential rock songs. Now, I don't know, 500? Yes. Most influential? Don't know, hard to say. And rock songs? Well, unfortunately, not all of them are rock songs. Just a look in the A's, for example. Roy Acuff and the Smoky Mountain Boys with Wabash Cannonball. Yeah, that's right, all those greasers with their black leather jackets and their girlfriends with beehive hairdos just kicking up their heels and having rumbles in the back alley with sharp knives, all to the tune of Roy Acuff and the Smoky Mountain Boys' Wabash Cannonball. Yes, sir. See it every day. Louis Armstrong, West End Blues. Sure, that's rock and roll. You know, the thing is, I know a lot about rock and roll. Louis Armstrong has virtually nothing to do with rock and roll. I'm telling you right now. Now, you may beg to differ on this, but he was jazz, all right? He was blues. He was not rock and roll. Had nothing to do with it. Just because he was a seminal figure in jazz doesn't mean he had anything to do with rock and roll, except to the extent that both Louis Armstrong and rock and roll had a great deal to do with the blues, right? So they throw Louis Armstrong in there, you know, and Roy Acuff. That's sort of like, you know, appeasing their constituencies there. And of course, AC/DC, Highway to Hell. Okay, well, it just so happens, I guess that would have to be one of the most influential, 500 influential, because of Stairway to Hell by Chuck Eddy. You see, I didn't come unprepared. I have my entire gigantic library of rock and roll books to refer back to. So, Aerosmith, Dream On. That's one of the most influential songs of all rock and roll. I mean, come on, give me a break. Aerosmith? I mean, but the only distinction they have is they're practically first in the alphabet by dint of their name, A-E-R-O. What the hell does Aerosmith mean anyway? If it's every bit as generic as any Smith would be, I suppose that it's a good moniker for this band. But really, it's just decanted vulgarity, basically. I mean, there's nothing particularly inspiring or influential about Aerosmith. Again, they just throw them in there. You know, they figure, well, the Aerosmith fans will go for that. They might complain if we don't mention their heroes, Aerosmith. So, I mean, so far, in Afrika Bambaataa, Planet Rock, you know, I was there. I saw Afrika Bambaataa perform back in 1982, and I was one of the very first people to write an article about a rap band in the rock press, all right? So I know what I'm talking about here, and sure, rap music, it has its place, but it's not a rock and roll song. It's a rap song. It's totally different. If they said the 500 most influential pop songs of the rock era, or the most influential popular music of the last 30 or 40 years, well, they might have a case, but the 500 most influential rock songs, nada. I don't think so. Otherwise, in the A's, their choices are fairly sound. The Allman Brother Band, Ramblin' Man and Whipping Post, the interminably lengthy Whipping Post, all of like 20 minutes long. You know, it makes me feel like I've been tied to a whipping post by the time they're finished. And Ramblin' Man, well, of course, it was part of a soundtrack to some popular movie of the 70s. So, of course, that had to be included, too. And they seem to, the cutoff date here seems to be like 1987. I noticed they mentioned Arrested Development, but that's about, you know, it's a shame. And the Animals get 2 songs. The House of the Rising Sun, which they got from Bob Dylan, a folk artist, logical choice to put in there with the rock albums, and We Gotta Get Out of This Place. Well, alright, it's the classic I Hate Work anthem, so I suppose it ought to be there. When the dirty old sun refused to shine. You know, it's Eric Burdon making out like he's actually a black guy. Like, not that he doesn't want to be, right? But anyway, I've said too much. Getting into the B's here. The B-52s, what have they ever, here's their influence. I mean, if you wanted that, you know, you could go to Yoko Ono for that kind of influence. Laverne Baker, Jim Dandy. You know, what about Tweedledee, whatever that thing she does. Tweedledee, Tweedledum, Tweedledum, Tweedledee, you know, dee-dee-dee-dee, you know. Hank Ballard and the Midnighters, Work With Me, Annie. Okay, no argument there. The Band, The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down in the Wait. All right, not too bad. The Beach Boys get, what, 5 songs, including Good Vibrations and Don't Worry Baby. That's a real rock song. Well, it's been building up inside of me for, I don't know how long. Yeah, man, that's a real peppy number. Yeah, me and my gal, we just go out dancing. We won the dance contest. You know, the Beastie Boys, you got to fight for your right to party. Well, if intrinsic vulgarity is a criterion for being one of the most influential rock songs, then I suppose that one belongs there. Well, let's see. They got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Beatles songs. Let's see. Does anybody else have more than 7 songs on this list? The Rolling Stones managed to get 6, and you know, but the big thing is, does Elvis Presley get 7? No. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Elvis Presley gets 6. The Beatles get 7 songs. Most of them appear to be from, oh, I don't know, it's about half and half, early period, middle period, late period. You know, it's pretty evenly divvied up there. A Day in the Life, yeah, okay. More on that later, by the way. Help, I Need Somebody. Hey Jude, I Want to Hold Your Hand. Norwegian Wood, Strawberry Fields Forever, and Yesterday. But somehow they managed to omit You Know My Name, Look Up the Number, Kansas City, and Mr. Moonlight, which might very well be 3 of the 7 worst Beatles songs ever recorded. Let's see. The Beau Brummels. I'm a Loser, Baby, so why don't you kill me? That's in there. Jeff Beck Group has to get in there. The Bee Gees, Staying Alive. That's a real rock song, all right. That's the #1 song from the rock era, okay, yeah, right. Chuck Berry, who practically invented rock and roll, he gets all of 3 songs, and My Ding-a-ling is not one of them, well, thankfully. The Big Bopper gets Chantilly Lace, Dead Guy belongs there. Okay, anybody who's dead obviously ought to be on this list, right? Whether their accomplishments were significant or not. And of course, you know, sooner or later we're going to get into the stuff that they actually left out here. This is an outrage, I tell you, an outrage. The one contribution of Janis Joplin's that they see fit to mention is Piece of My Heart. Not, Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz. As for Big Star, they get 1 song, September Girls. Well, you know, this must have been picked at random because it seems to me that the stuff from the 3rd Big Star album would have been much more appropriate. Virtually anything from that album, like say Jesus Christ or I don't know, you know, just about anything. What else we got? Black Sabbath, Iron Man, and Paranoid. Yep, yeah, they're real influential, all right. Well, actually, I guess they are for better or worse. Blondie with Heart of Glass, a real rock and roll song. What's out of love and it was a gas, soon turned out to be a pain in the ass. Wow, she said the word ass, man. That's really daring. Cutting edge. Let's see, what else we got here? Boston, More Than a Feeling. That's pretty appropriate. More Than a Feeling, the most affectless band to come out of rock and roll for the past 25 years, and their big hit is More Than a Feeling. David Bowie gets 3. Ziggy Stardust, of course, that well-known rock and roll song. Space Oddity, yet another famous rock and roll song, and Fame. Yeah, oh, and he co-wrote that with John Lennon, so it must be a rock and roll song, even though it sounds an awful lot like funk proto-disco to me. The box tops with the letter, "Give me a ticket for an airplane." Yeah, okay, sure. That belongs there. 3 songs by James Brown. Jackson Brown gets in there. Buffalo Springfield. You better stop, look. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Yeah, if it were at that tempo, maybe it would be a rock song, but otherwise, I don't know. The Byrds with 8 Miles High. Okay, no argument there. Although, did you know Jim McGuinn was originally going to name it at 6 Miles High after the actual height that an airplane flies at. But when they heard the Beatles 8 days a week, they decided, well, 8's a better rock and roll number. So, there you go. And Mr. Tambourine Man, another well-known rock and roll song that they got from that well-known rock and roll artist, Bob Dylan. And of course, in the C range here, we get Johnny Cash with Folsom Prison Blues. Well, yeah, I guess the walking bass line somehow qualifies it for rock and roll. And I Walk the Line with the immortal, I spent a hard day's working every time. I spent a hard day's working all the time. I spent a hard day's working for a dime because you're mine. I walk the line. The guy's got half an octave, you know, and it's well, let's see, Duke of Earl, Duke of Earl, real imaginative. Let's see, Mufti of Emir. You know, it could be anything. But no, it's Duke of Earl. Yeah. Okay. Ray Charles. Oh, wait a minute. Chubby Checker is here. How do you like that? And here I thought they managed to leave out Chubby Checker. Just goes to show. Let's see. Want to hear some music? Come on. Anyway, I managed to mention the Clash. Again, you know, the Clash and Johnny Cash ought to have gotten together. You know, Johnny Clash, because I mean, Joe Strummer had about as much of an octave range as Johnny Cash did, didn't he? Patsy Cline, I Fall to Pieces. Jimmy Cliff, that well-known rock and roll star with Many Rivers to Cross and The Harder They Come. Yeah, okay. You know what they're really saying is that, you know, these styles were incorporated into rock and roll, which basically is undefinable. So it's anything you care to call it. If you say, oh, this is a reggae song, but actually, since it was so influential, it must be a rock and roll song as well. That's where we're going to put it on this thing here. You know, they talk about the Clash in this. They don't mention a band which was every bit as influential in its own way, the Crafts. You see, if these guys knew where they were at, they would know that, you know, there's bands that are still influential, but only the real cognoscenti know about, like the Crafts. Band from the Roxy, okay, I didn't want to play that anyway. You know, just big anarchist rock type people. In fact, they were founded just to confound the Clash. Gosh, what else we got? The Coasters, okay, Eddie Cochran, alright. Joe Cocker, how boring. Sam Cooke. Yep, another well-known rock and roll star. And like the one garage band they managed to have in here, instead of having like 50 of them, they have one. What's the most representative garage band song? Why, it's Psychotic Reaction by the Count 5, of course. The one that everybody knows. They don't bother to go out and pick one that nobody's ever heard of. No, they couldn't do that. It might baffle too many people. Creedence Clearwater Revival. Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Again, another well-known hard rock band. See, Baldy, Fatso, and long hair, you know, I mean, oh, and what about Johnny Cymbals' Mr. Bassman? Okay, maybe it's just a novelty song to you, but I think it's one of those songs which defines rock and roll, both in sound and in process, right? Because what it's about is it's about rock and roll. I mean, basically, it's about the bass line in doo-wop songs. This thing doesn't work too well. Now, this is rock and roll. So, oh, and Commander Cody with Hot Rod Lincoln. I mean, I know it's been done by other artists, right? But nevertheless, how could they have a list of 500 influential rock and roll songs and leave out the song Hot Rod Lincoln? I mean, Chubby Checker will tell you the only rock songs worth a damn are about cars or girls, right? And Hot Rod Lincoln certainly qualifies there. And let's see what they got. The Crystals. They managed to include Dadu Ron Ron, and he's a rebel, but they overlooked He Hit Me and It Felt Like a Kiss for some particular reason, which could have easily fit in there instead of the Culture Club with Time, Clock of the Heart. Culture Club. There's a real oxymoron right there. I mean, culture is an individual thing. It's a process of individual cognition. It has nothing to do with getting together with a mob of other cultured people. Oh, all right. The Damned, they managed to get them in there. Danny and the Juniors, you know, the token doo-wop band in there, and Deep Purple, Smoke on the Water, which, you know, the riff of which every single rock band, every single lousy garage band in the subsequent 20 years has managed to appropriate in one way or another. So I suppose they belong there. The Delmore Brothers with the well-known, very famous Hillbilly Boogie. Well, that's obviously a #1 rock song. They get so much wrong here. I mean, I'm the wrong hero, right? And even I think they're wrong. And I'm not usually right about anything. I'm usually wrong. And let's see. Devo, Whip It. No. Satisfaction. That's the song that Devo really influenced people with. But no. The Rolling Stones did it, so we can't mention it twice, because our stupid anal compulsive list has to be perfect, has to mention everybody, even if it has no bearing on rock and roll. We can't afford to piss anybody off. So, let's see. Bo Diddley with the imaginative song Bo Diddley, which Ed Sullivan didn't want him to play on his show because he said, who ever heard of a song where the lyrics are Bo Diddley, you know, the name of the artist. It's like Elvis getting on there and saying, hi, I'm Elvis, you know, I got a hunk of burning Elvis. But no, anyway, he didn't do that. He was a nice boy, and they only showed him from the hip up, you know. Another one of those ridiculous myths that attach themselves to rock and roll. Jazz doesn't have these kind of myths, these kind of charismatic performers whose antics people talk about. Actually, they do, but jazz is a dead letter, and so only jazz cognoscenti mention these kind of anecdotes about jazz performers, like how Miles Davis never looked at the audience, always had his back turned to him, stuff like that. But no, Ted Nugent biting the head off of a chicken or a pigeon or whatever. Yeah, that's much more colorful. So those are the anecdotes that go down in musical history, or at least pop music history. The Dixie Cups with Chapel of Love. Come on, the Dixie Cups did hundreds of great songs. Two-Way, Park Away, but no, it's just the most mainstream stuff that they managed to mention. The Dixie Hummingbirds, I'll Live Again. Just because they schmooze around with Paul Simon, they deserve to be on this list, right? It's because they're a gospel group, and there's a constituency for this kind of music. Sure, gospel has some incredibly distant relation to rock and roll, so obviously it belongs on this list. The Doors with Light My Fire and The End. And I don't know. Bob Dylan, that well-known rock and roll star, with Like a Rolling Stone, The Times They Are Changin', which one critic has pointed out should actually have been called These Tunes I Am A-Changin'. Oh, and what happened? Oh, you got all these great artists like Donovan and Lonnie Donegan with the Rock on the Line. You know, it's just like watered-down blues that the British called skiffle. And they managed to get Dr. Dre in there, but they don't manage to get Joey D in the Peppermint Twist. Peppermint Twist, they don't have it in here. And it's like the one rock and roll song, I think it's the single greatest rock and roll song ever written, and nobody has ever been able to improve on Peppermint Twist. You know, from the very opening part. Well, they got a new dance, and it goes like this. I mean, that epitomizes rock and roll, and they don't manage to get it in here. The Eagles, you know, palpable mediocrities like the Eagles, who get not one but two songs, Hotel California and Take It Easy. You know, these are like really hard-charging, dynamic rock songs, aren't they? Dwayne Eddy, okay, the Eurythmics. Sweet dreams are made of this. Well, you have to put that in there or my girlfriend will never talk to me again. The Everly Brothers, okay. The Five Satins in the Still of the Night. Gotta get your obligatory doo-wop in there. Okay, that's fine. The Flamingos, I Only Have Eyes for You. Alright, it's so incredibly sublime, it's almost hallucinogenic, so I suppose it belongs in there, even though strictly speaking, it's not really a rock song per se. It was sort of it's in the middle period. Before jazz had totally disappeared from the pop music charts and before rock and roll's hegemony had firmly entrenched itself, then we had groups like the Flamingos. Fleetwood Mac, Go Your Own Way, and I sure wish they would. The Flying Burrito Brothers with Sin City. Not that there's like not hundreds of other songs that the Flying Burrito Brothers did better, and but no, you gotta pick one, and we might as well just like get a dart and throw it at one of their albums, and that's the one that the dart hits. The Four Seasons with Big Girls Don't Cry, which Leslie Gore later wrote an answer song to called It's My Party and I'll Cry If I Want To. In case you're interested in knowing, let's see, is Leslie Gore in here? No, I'm afraid not. I guess she doesn't rate, man. She doesn't rate. Nope, they completely forget her. Alright. What else? Aretha Franklin, that well-known rock and roll artiste with Chain of Fools. Alright. And I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You. And, well, Respect belongs on there, but I don't know about the other two. Free with All Right Now, okay. Bobby Fuller 4, that's like one of the best songs they could have possibly picked. And then it's followed by Lowell Fulson and Reconsider Baby. 1940s Blues, obviously this belongs on here. Oh, but what about Fairport Convention and Come All Ye? You know, and as long as not one Fairport Convention song manages to get on here, right? I guess it's okay to pick people like Bob Dylan and Peter, Paul and Mary, but we can't have any of these British folk groups on here, even though they combine elements of dynamics and harmonics of rock and roll with old English folk music, nor are you going to find much in the way of Steel Eye Span here. For example, The Weaver and the Factory Maid, or Alison Gross, or The Wee Wee Man. No, none of those are on here. They don't belong there, right? So, I mean, we can't... We can be prejudicial in favor of American folk music, but when those British try to combine rock and roll with folk music, no, we can't have any of that. Peter Gabriel gets one song, and it's FICO, although maybe Shock the Monkey might have been more appropriate, or Salisbury Hill, or, oh, I don't know, Here Comes the Flood. But no, gotta be politically correct here, so FICO's the one that makes the cut. Cecil Gant, We're Gonna Rock. I can't say I've ever heard of Cecil Gant, but I have heard of the Gants, but they're not on here, of course. No. Marvin Gaye, Sexual Healing, that well-known rock and roll song. Gary Glitter, Rock and Roll Part 2, one of the most vulgar songs ever, which makes it, of course, perfect for playing in sports arenas during halftime. The Go-Go's, We Got the Beat. That's about all they got is a beat. They don't have anything else, like talent. The Golden Gate Quartet with Rock My Soul. Yet another, like, real prominent, high-profile rock and roll band to throw on here. The Grateful Dead with Dark Star and Uncle John's Band. I don't know, maybe Playing in the Band might have been more appropriate, or, I don't know, Touch of Grey maybe. I mean, those are songs that have more of the elements of rock and roll to them. How can you say that Dark Star, for example, is the most, or one of the two most influential Grateful Dead songs? Grateful Dead is just basically hokum music from the 20s, modernized to a certain degree. And I suppose to that extent it belongs on such a rock and roll list, since rock and roll's distant ancestor is in fact the hokum jazz, which arose out of the 1920s, and which incidentally, in itself, the 1920s music came out of still earlier music, like spasm bands of the early part of the century. Basically just a bunch of kids with a bunch of homemade instruments playing in the streets for the coins that people throw. So I mean that's the true ancestor of rock and roll to a certain degree, and the Grateful Dead reflect it to that extent. Al Green, Let's Stay Together, Guns N' Roses, of course, we got to get them in there. I mean, not that they've done anything worthwhile whatsoever, but they still belong there because, again, we don't want to piss off the youngsters. We got to throw in something. Duh. We don't know much about music after 1983, say, but that Guns N' Roses band, they sure are good. Let's throw one of their songs in there just for fun. Woody Guthrie with 3 songs. Woody Guthrie? Come on. Get wise to yourself. The only reason he's influential is because he influenced Bob Dylan, right? That doesn't make him, like, the most influential rock and roll artist, or at least one of the several hundred. And besides, if you're going to put Pretty Boy Floyd, I think the version by Joan Baez was far more influential than the Woody Guthrie version, no, wouldn't you? And they, somehow they managed to miss the Holy Modal Rounders, who had a number of great rock songs. Maybe they weren't influential, but they should have been in a better world. And of course, Captain Beefheart. What happened to him? He's not on this list. Well, I don't know how they could have missed him. And, Pere Ubu. No Pere Ubu, no Public Image. No. People haven't heard of those. Duh. Just because, we're going to pander to the ignorance of the rock listening public. We're going to throw in a couple of blues, our prototypal blues bands, but that's about it. That's about the only, I like Slim Harpo, Raining in My Heart. Well, the Rolling Stones covered a Slim Harpo song, therefore, they must be good. And we're going to throw Slim Harpo and Wynonie Harris with Good Rockin' Tonight. Okay, Wilbert Harrison with Kansas City. The Beatles covered it, so we got to mention it. Dale Hawkins with Susie Q. Well, Creedence covered it, so we got to mention it. Screamin' Jay Hawkins with I Put a Spell on You. Certainly one of the most grotesque novelty songs of all times. And if we're going to have one of those on there, we might as well have that. Richard Hell and the Voidoids, I Belong to the Blank Generation. Well, it defined a generation. Jimi Hendrix, 3 songs, all right. The Hollies, 1 song. The Hollies, who had like 20 top 10 hits, and they get 1 song, which is Bus Stop, which was written by Graham Goldman, who was later instrumental in writing 10cc's only hit, I'm Not in Love. Now here's rock and roll for you. There, how do you like that, huh? Well, anyway, wrapping this up, or at least moving right along. John Lee Hooker, boom, 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 gonna knock your head down. Okay, yeah, he belongs there, I suppose. I mean, if any, the only, this is the first instance of a blues artist who actually belongs on this list, I mean, that stuff was so prototypically rock and roll that, I mean, there would be a sin of omission. But, what about Alamonia Blues? I mean, they could have picked a dozen John Lee Hooker songs that belonged on here, but no, they picked Boogie Chillin', Boogie Chillin'. Just because Canned Heat covered it, that means it belongs here, right? Howlin' Wolf, all right. Little Red Rooster, Smokestack Lightning, and Spoonful. Unfortunately, Charlie Patton was the one who popularized Spoonful and did the great performance of it. But, no one's ever heard of Charlie Patton, duh, blah, even though he was the grandfather of the Delta Blues. Let's see, is Charlie Patton even on here now? No Charlie Patton, sorry. Because we can't mention his most famous song, and at the same time mention the fact that Howlin' Wolf also did it, The Human League. Don't You Want Me? Well, you already know the answer to that. Mississippi John Hurt, Stack-O-Lee Blues. Now, it appears to me that Mississippi John Hurt, didn't he do an album called I Do Not Play No Rock and Roll? It's like, and Johnny Cash did a song called I Will Rock and Roll for You If I Have To. And yet both of these anti-rock and roll creeps are on here. Let's see, Husker Du, Turn On the News. Like, I guess, it was really hard pressed to pick out one Husker Du song to mention, so it turned out to be from Zen Arcade, and it was the only really, really good song on Zen Arcade. So, but what about New Day Rising? They could have easily picked that. instead, but no, no, no. Tim Hardin, If I Were a Carpenter. Why isn't this on here, huh? That was pretty darn influential. Robin Hitchcock, The Soft Boys, not mentioned once. Soft Boys with Underwater Moonlight, Robin Hitchcock with Superman, or any of a number of a dozen different. And Jonathan Richman, he doesn't get on here either. None of the eccentrics. Nobody that would upset the apple cart manages to make the cut here. The Impressions with People Get Ready, although, I don't know, there's other Impression songs that might have been better. The Ink Spots, Iron Butterfly, well, for sheer length alone, I suppose they deserve to be on here, right? The Isley Brothers with Shout, parts 1 and 2, okay. Let's see. Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. Yeah. They managed to mention Going to a Go-Go, which the Rolling Stones covered, The Tracks of My Tears, which Linda Ronstadt covered, and You Really Got a Hold on Me, which the Beatles covered. But they don't mention the live version of Way Over There, which is like the most sublime song in virtually the entire rock and roll canon. Again and again, they make the convenient choices, the uninformed choices. Forgive me if I go on at great length. If you have no interest in rock and roll, you should probably have stopped watching by now. The Jackson 5 with ABC and I Want You Back, all right. Michael Jackson with Beat It and Billie Jean. Michael Jackson, when's he going to come out with the song called Megalomania, which basically is his whole act now? Mahalia Jackson, Elmore James, Etta James, Rick James, all prominent rock and roll stars, and Blind Lemon Jefferson, of course. Well, with Matchbox Blues, since the Beatles covered it, it's got to be on here. And, I don't know, Jethro Tull with Aqualung. Oh, God, please help me. But, as bad as that is, as grotesque and out of all proportion as Aqualung is, Joan Jett and the Blackhearts' I Love Rock and Roll, and Jane's Addiction, anything by Jane's Addiction, certainly does not belong on this list, any more than Tommy James and the Shondells' Hanky Panky belongs on here either. Or Jen and Dean's Surf City, I don't know, it was number 1. I suppose if you're going to mention the Beach Boys, you're going to at least throw one Jen and Dean song there. Well, why not the Joker is Wild, or other obscure Jen and Dean gems, like Evil Plot to Blow Up Batman, for example. Heart and Soul might have been a more appropriate choice. It was their first hit after all. But no. Gotta pick Surf City, not Dead Man's Curve now, which might have been a little more logical given the criteria that all rock and roll songs are about cars or girls. And speaking of which, Jefferson Airplane managed to get on there with Somebody to Love and White Rabbit, which were basically their only 2 hits, and really the only 2 songs worth listening to, although Volunteers might have been a good song because it was of its time. It was a defining statement, a political statement. But of course, no. We don't want any politics ruining our little rock and roll sandbox here. So no, it doesn't get here. What about Janis Joplin and Combination of the Two? No. Even though that's like the most intrinsically rock and roll song with the call and response and all that other stuff, and it's just so viscerally exciting, I suppose, the fuddy-duddy, stodgy people that selected stuff on this list couldn't possibly, oh, my heart, my digitalis, where is it? If they actually heard an exciting rock and roll song, they might drop over from exhaustion and excitement. Billy Joel, I Love You Just the Way You Are. There's a guy talking to himself in a mirror, right? Billy Joel, Elton John, and then, listen to this. Here's a real rock and roll song for you. It's called I Steal Weapons to Commit Further Crimes.
committed for the
There's rock and roll for you. Anyway, they really, they skip James, perhaps appropriately, with I'm So Glad. But they managed to mention Louis Jordan and his Timpani 5, Robert Johnson, Blind Willie Johnson, and Little Willie John. With Fever. Fever's not a rock and roll song. Fever is one of the most boring songs ever written, if you want to know the truth. But of course they had to throw it in there because, all the old jazz heads, the stupid old farts, the rhythm and blues creeps, they got to get there, they got to ruin it. They got to ruin our rock thing. But they do manage to get Joy Division's Love Will Tear Us Apart, which very few people seem to realize is actually a parody of the Captain and Tennille's Love Will Keep Us Together. I thought you'd like to know that. And then we got the Kings. Albert King, B.B. King, Ben E. King, Carole King, and Freddie King. Fortunately, we also have the Kingsmen with Louie Louie, and the Kinks, who built their entire career on Louie Louie, and Kiss with Rock and Roll All Night and Party Every Day. This is a real sterling example for our nation's youth here. Buddy Knox's Party Doll is like right next to Kraftwerk's Autobahn. Here, you gotta hear this. Here's another real rock and roll song. It's these crazy incongruencies which get me.
I never remember when you broke my heart. Nor have I believed you were ever fair. You got the kid. You got the car. And now I don't remember what you're trying to do. Now I don't remember anything at all. And now I don't remember anything at all. I'm sorry you turned me around when you saw me fall. And now I don't remember anything at all.
See, I thought it would be instructive to include some examples of rock and roll which I myself composed, just so I didn't look like some sort of creep that, like the eunuch and the harem, doesn't know what to do but can tell everybody else what to do, right? Well, let's see. LL Cool J, yeah, prominent rock and roll guy, right? Cyndi Lauper, yeah, yet another example of great rock and roll here. Oh God, they could have picked like 500 Chuck Berry songs that would have been better. I mean, the combined output of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Who, the Kinks, the Animals, the Hollies, the Guess Who, and you name it. Those could have been the 500 greatest rock and roll songs. I mean, but no, they had to get variety in here. Leadbelly, the Midnight Special. Come on! Just because it was the name of this really bad Don Kirshner show doesn't mean that it's influential in any way. I can name 100 songs that Leadbelly did that were more influential than that. Let's see, Rock Island Line, for example, or he did Matchbox 2, and Eileen Goodnight, maybe, or Irene Goodnight, whatever it's called. That was actually a big hit. Maybe not for him, but it was a big hit. And, Leadbelly did hundreds of songs. And this is the one they picked because of some shitty television show. It's an outrage, I tell you. I won't stand for it. Well, anyway, where were we here? Leadbelly, right? Oh, and Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin, bad derivative rock and roll. rock and roll which manages to ruin the blues from which it steals every ounce and drop of its inspiration. So, of course, they get 4 songs. The Left Bank, with their hard-charging rocker, Walk Away Renee. They always pick the most obvious ones. The Left Bank did dozens of great songs. Ballerina, for example, just for one. Barterers and Their Wives. You know, the Left Bank had like 3 albums, right? You'd think they could have picked like something other than the most obvious one, the one that they had their only hit with. But no. John Lennon gets three separate entries here. But does Paul McCartney manage to get one? Yes, he gets Maybe I'm Amazed. But John Lennon gets 3. Give Peace a Chance. Yeah, very influential. Obviously, it caused the ending of the Vietnam War. And Imagine, and yes, everybody does in fact now have no possessions, and Instant Karma, which he rewrote as Nobody Told Me. And managed to have a hit from Beyond the Grave with a rewrite of a song that he had already had a hit with. That's nice. Jerry Lee Lewis with Great Balls of Fire and Whole Lot of Shaking going on, but not Pink Pedal Pushers or Milkshake Mademoiselle or even Old Black Joe. No. Just his 2 most obvious ones. We're talking obvious here. Little Ava, obviously the Locomotion was like very influential because Grand Funk Railroad did a cover of it. And a shitty one too. Little Feat with Dixie Chicken. Okay, but I don't know. They did a great song. I say, God damn, that rock and roll is bad for the body, bad for the soul. You know, they did hundreds of great songs, but no Dixie Chicken, their stupid mid-paced jive number. Well, I'll be your Dixie Chicken, I'll be your Tennessee Lamb. You know, Little Feat did great songs, and yet, forget it. We'll pick the most palpably mediocre of their well-known songs. You know, that's just it. Just as Mark Twain said that beige is the color that was obviously chosen by a committee, so this was obviously chosen by a committee, and they totally drained any sign of spontaneity or originality in their selections out of this process. Professor Longhair with Tipatina, Little Walter with Juke, The Lovin' Spoonful with Do You Believe in Magic? A sort of frothy cotton candy confection number, but Summer in the City was their most influential and innovative song. But no, do you believe in magic? Do you believe in bubblegum pop and the Archies? You know, Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. They do manage to get I'm Not a Juvenile Delinquent in here, which is good. Leonard Skinner with Free Bird, back to back with Madonna's Like a Virgin, and the Mamas and the Papas, California Dreamin'. But, you know, they do make a good selection every now and then. Blue Moon by the Marcells. You know, that's a great song. Curtis Mayfield, Superfly. Yep, once again, MC Hammer, You Can't Touch This. Oh, great rock songs, man. Hey, you guys got a lot of great taste. They managed to pick Barry McGuire's Eve of Destruction, but they don't manage to pick its follow-up song, Dawn of Correction, now, do they? Don McLean's American Pie. Okay, you know, for once they actually hit the nail right on the head. American Pie, right? Good, very good. But what about Crying, his remake of the Roy Orbison hit? I'm surprised they didn't pick Vincent, too. But it's sensitive nature, obviously very influential. Blind Millie McTell, Statesboro Blues. Yes, once again, they do manage to get something right. Statesboro Blues is probably the greatest blues song ever written, and they do manage to get it. And you can tell a blues song is great because it's so original and of its kind that no rock band would even dare to try to touch it. You don't see too many people trying to do Robert Johnson songs, right? Especially not Hellhound on My Trail. It's just too hard. Who needs it? Like the Rolling Stones said, why bother listening to us when you can go back and re-listen to the originals? Let's see. Amos Milburn's Let's Have a Party, but not the Collins Kids' Let's Have a Party, with the immortal line, I never kissed a bear, never kissed a goon, but I can shake a chicken in the middle of the room. John Cougar Mellencamp and Metallica and Midnight Oil. Oh, my eyes glaze over. Steve Miller Band's Fly Like an Eagle, the most soporific song of the 70s, perhaps. Joni Mitchell, okay, gotta get one in there. Moby Grape's Omaha, alright. The Monkees, I'm a Believer, Last Train to Clarksville. They could have easily picked 3 or 4 more. the Dolphin Song, for example, Pleasant Valley Sunday, What Am I Doing Hanging Round, Listen to the Band, Circle Sky. You know, all songs equally as good, if not better. But now they got to get the palpable Beatle ripoff monkeys instead of the monkeys who were starting to like actually develop as a band monkeys. All right. Bill Monroe's Mule Skinner Blues, okay, extremely good choice here. I want to give credit where credit's due, but then they ruin it with the Moody Blues and Nights in White Satin. Have you ever heard anything more morbidly ridiculous than Nights in White Satin? And that asinine poem that they follow it up with? Even worse, breathe deep the gathering gloom, watch lights fade from every room. Yeah, God, Malcolm McLaren could have a field day with something like that. They get Van Morrison's Brown Eyed Girl and Madame George, which of course is a really great song, and Moon Dance. But they don't manage to get Them's Gloria, which really belongs there, of course. One token Mothers of Invention song, Brown Shoes Don't Make It. One token Mott the Hoople song, All the Young Dudes. But they don't manage to get anything by The Move, for example, Do Ya, or Blackberry Way, or Curly, or I Can Hear the Grass Grow, which obviously belongs on here, very influential. They don't get anything by the Mekons, particularly the early fast product Mekons, like 32 Weeks. No, that would be a big no-no. Ricky Nelson's Hello, Mary Lou, great rock song there, but of course they don't get Garden Party, which is like really more to the point. Aaron Neville, Randy Newman, one song. The greatest songwriter of his generation, he gets one song. And it's Sail Away at that. The heavily orchestrated Sail Away. Nothing like intrinsically rock and roll can ever like really make it on this list unless it passes through 3 or 4 buffers and manages through virtue of its incredible greatness to get on here. Well, let's see, we need a token New York Dolls song. What about Personality Crisis? Not Frankenstein, God forbid. Nirvana. We got to get one Nirvana song on there. So, of course, it Smells Like Teen Spirit and not their far superior cover of The Man Who Sold the World. Because, of course, David Bowie did that. We already mentioned him. The OJs with Love Train. All right. But what about Drug Train by the Cramps? No. Too rock and rollish. Doesn't belong here. Phil Oakes with I Ain't a Marchin' Anymore. Although anything from Phil Oakes' greatest hits would have been far more appropriate. Like My Kingdom for a Car, or Chords of Fame, or virtually anything from that album would have been great. But no, we got to get his early folk music stuff, because obviously, since this is a list about rock and roll, we got to throw folk music on here. I mean, if you want to talk influential, maybe A Small Circle of Friends would have been better. But no. Roy Orbison gets one song, Oh Pretty Woman. Just go figure it, huh? Johnny Otis with Willie and the Hand Jive. We gotta get Johnny Otis in there. Poor guy, he tried so hard. Obviously, since he tried so hard, he must be very influential. Parliament with Tear the Roof Off the Sucker, Tear the Roof Off the Sucker, Tear the Roof Off the Motherfucker. Again, every once in a while something good gets passed here, in spite of themselves. Pearl Jam's Jeremy. Alright. Carl Perkins, Blue Suede Shoes and Matchbox. Pine Top Perkins with Pine Top's Boogie Woogie, because, of course, all of your famous FM musicologists and jazz instructors insist that Boogie Woogie has a great deal to do with rock and roll. Since it was the popular music in the late 30s, obviously it must also be rock and roll. Okay, fair enough. If you're going to mention one Boogie Woogie person, it might as well be Pine Top Perkins, whose name is on every drooling dotard and lisping tot's lips. Peter, Paul, and Mary, If I Had a Hammer. Well, I got this message for Peter, Paul, and Mary. I have a hammer, and you better watch out. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Man, this guy, Tom Petty. I don't want to get on a high horse here, but Tom Petty. What excuse does this man have for living? It's just like the palpable mediocrity of rock and roll since the early 80s has enabled like non-entities like Tom Petty and the equally undistinguished Heartbreakers to ascend to the top of the ladder. There were plenty of mediocrities in the 60s, but in the 70s, but They didn't manage to like dominate MTV to the degree that Tom Petty's every drooled insight manages to do. Wilson Pickett in the Midnight Hour. Oh, come on. What about Land of a Thousand Dances? Obviously, picking Cannibal and the Headhunters' Land of a Thousand Dances would have been far better, even. But if not them, oh, we never heard of them. Oh, you mean that group of Hispanics off in Los Angeles in the early 60s? Oh, well, since nobody's here ever heard of them except Cognoscenti, obviously we can't pick Cannibal and the Headhunters, even though Land of a Thousand Dances was incredibly influential. No, 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 we might as well pick stupid old Wilson Pickett's In the Midnight Hour instead of Land of a Thousand Dances. Pink Floyd, Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2, yawn. Money, yawn. Well, they managed to get See Emily Play, but not Arnold Layne. Arnold Layne, far better. And they don't get Interstellar Overdrive, which practically created a whole new genre of rock and roll. No, no, it's Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2, boring old John Waters, whatever his name is, Roger Waters, and music, wanking, musical wanking. The Platters, The Great Pretender, one of the most obnoxious songs ever. The Police, obviously great rock and roll stars, With Every Breath You Take, or Roxanne. Roxanne is cheesy. Every Breath You Take is like sentimental slush. If they had to pick one Police song, it should have been Message in a Bottle. Come on. Get wise to yourself. And now we have like Elvis Presley with Heartbreak Hotel, which he got from a demo, Jailhouse Rock, which he had no hand in writing. It was a Lieber Stoller song. Love Me Tender, which was based on Annie Laurie, a traditional folk song of the 19th century. Mystery Train, which also he had nothing to do with. Suspicious Minds, his great comeback album, and That's All Right, which was by Big Mama Thornton. Yep. Elvis Presley. What about Marie's the Name, huh? No, 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 no. Can't have anything contemporary. Has to be Elvis ripping off all other people. We gotta do that. The Pretenders, Brass in Pocket. What? Again, the continuing appeal of the Pretenders continues to elude me. They haven't written anything good in at least 15 years. Come on, you know it, I know it, but they still managed to trade on their late 70s nostalgia thing and take it to the limit. Little Prince with Little Red Corvette and When Doves Cry. Well, alright, what about Purple Rain? Virtually anything else from Purple Rain, but not When Doves Cry. I mean, come on, it's just techno synth, basically. I Would Die For You, maybe? That might have been a good one. Around the World in a Day? Even anything from Around the World in a Day would have been better. I can't argue with Little Red Corvette, though, even though, well, I don't know, I've gotten kind of sick of it, to tell you the truth. Procol Harum with a whiter shade of pale, but not Conquistador. Again, Public Image doesn't get on here, even though their song Public Image obviously belongs here. Perubu, not mentioned once, although, Cloud 149, not a Lime Impact, or anything from the modern dance or dub housing could have easily fit on here. Queen, instead Queen with Bohemian Rhapsody, because it was in a stupid movie called Wayne's World, therefore it was influential. Queen Latifah, yeah, that's rock and roll alright. A woman who hates white people, and so it's obviously part of rock and roll. Quicksilver Messenger Service with Who Do You Love? Again, they could have picked any of a number of Quicksilver songs, but that's the one they picked because it was based on an old blues song. Question Mark and the Mysterians, 96 Tears. Let's see, R.E.M., Losing My Religion, and Radio Free Europe, yawn, yawn, yawn. What about Exhuming McCarthy? Ma Rainey and her tub, jug, washboard band. Prove It On Me Blues. I don't think so. Again, we got to throw Ma Rainey in there, and while we're at it, why don't we get Bessie Smith as well? Yeah, let's see, is she in here? Patti Smith. Huey Piano Smith and his Clowns, and yes, Bessie Smith with Downhearted Blues. Even though Bessie Smith had like 160 songs in her recorded repertoire that have come down to us, they picked one of the less rock and roll like songs. Just go figure. Ramones gets one song. Sheena is a punk rocker. Obviously, the Ramones probably should have gotten 4 or 5, but, well, we can't think of 4 or 5 Ramones songs off the top of our heads. Not, now I want to sniff some glue. Not lobotomy, you know, not mongoloid. No, we can't have any of those because they're offensive. We got to get the least offensive Ramones song. Not rock and roll radio. No, can't have any of that. Let's see. The Young Rascals with Groovin' and Good Lovin'. I'm surprised I didn't go the whole hog with Sentimentality and have How Can I Be Sure with Felix Cavaliere. Or the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Give it away now. If I heard that song, if I could give it away, I would, believe me. So sick of that song. Otis Redding with Shake and Try a Little Tenderness and Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. Okay so far, but why not Respect? Or even his version of Day Tripper. Those might have been good to add to this list. Jimmy Reed, Bright Lights, Big City, okay. Pretty respectable. Them did a version of it, which is pretty darn good. Lou Reed, Walk on the Wild Side, okay. Guess we gotta have her Standard Decadence in here. I mean, at least they had the good sense to pick one Lou Reed song. Oh, they couldn't have picked anything by the Velvet Underground, for example. Like Heroin. Oh no, that might offend too many people. Wait a minute, Heroin is on here. They did pick it. How do you like that? But they also picked White Light, White Heat, which I don't think anybody has ever listened to in its entirety. But, you know, again, it was influential, so we might as well pick it. Nothing from their 3rd or 4th album. Not Sweet Jane, not Jesus, not Rock and Roll. No. Just pick the most obvious stuff. One from their 1st album, one from their 2nd album, and that's it. Not Pale Blue Eyes, you know, nothing like that. Let's see, the Replacements. Well, we got to throw them in there. Paul Revere and the Raiders, Cliff Richard and the Shadows. 3 songs by Little Richard, but not My Desire, which strictly speaking isn't a rock and roll song, but it's still one of his greatest, most sublime songs. The Righteous Brothers, You Lost That Love and Feeling, since it was in a bad movie about ghosts, so we've got to throw this in here. The Rolling Stones, with Honky Tonk Woman, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, Jumpin' Jack Flash, and of course that well-known rock song Miss You, as well as Sympathy for the Devil, and Time Is on My Side. Yeah, alright. Well, you missed dozens. Nothing like, say, Tumble Dice, or Happy, both of which epitomize rock and roll to a certain degree. The Ronettes with Be My Baby. Okay. Nothing by Darlene Love, though. Roxy Music, Love Is a Drug, another well-known Love Is the Drug for Me. Just because Ray Manzarek is in your band doesn't mean you're a rock band. Roxy Music did hundreds, dozens of songs that had more rock and roll to them than Love Is the Drug. But we gotta pick one, so might as well be this. Run DMC with Walk This Way. It must be rock because Aerosmith's involved with it. Right, Aerosmith. The epitome of rock and roll. Let's see, what do we got here? I suppose I should just confine myself to picking out the ones that were really bad or really good, because this is kind of like going on a bit, isn't it? Let's see. The Seeds with Pushing Too Hard, but not 1,000 Shadows. Their palpably superior remake of the same song. Again, all the most obvious stuff. Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band. Night Moves. Oh, if I ever hear that song again, I think I'll kill myself. The Shadows of Night's version of Gloria, not Them's version. Del Shannon with Runaway. Okay. And then followed by the Shirelles with Dedicated to the One I Love and Will You Love Me Tomorrow, Carole King songs. Simon and Garfunkel, Bridge Over Troubled Water, and The Sounds of Silence, about as inimical to rock and roll as you can possibly get, but since they were big hits, I guess they must have been influential to some degree. I can't exactly define how. And since Sister Sledge's We Are Family became the anthem of the Pittsburgh Steelers, therefore it must be a rock and roll song. I mean, it seems as though any loudish song that becomes the anthem of a sports team somehow manages to be included on this list, forgetting the all-important criteria of, is it about girls or cars? Huey Piano Smith and his Clowns, Rockin' Pneumonia and Boogie Woogie Flu, oh, yawn, yawn, yawn. Bruce Springsteen. You know what I think about Bruce Springsteen, don't you? Born to Run, right? That's Born to Run backwards. That's Born to Run forwards. I spew it from my mouth. The Standell's Dirty Water, the anthem of Boston, right? But it's not even about, the band isn't even from Boston, they're from Los Angeles. Let's see, Iggy Pop and the Stooges, I Want to Be Your Dog. The Stray Cats with Rock This Town. Oh, come on, the Stray Cats, you know, they stole their Stray Cats strut from Jerry Lee Lewis and Carl Perkins. I mean, it's basically just a rewrite of Pink Pedal Pushers. Well, mysteriously, the Stray Cats get the credit for writing it. Barrett Strong's Money. Okay, that's pretty good. Shows that their heads aren't totally up their ass. But then the Sugar Hill Gang with Rapper's Delight. Since it's a seminal rap song, it must also be a seminal rock and roll song as well. Donna Summer with Love to Love You Baby, another real rock and roller. Let's see, the Surfaris with Wipeout, and the Swinging Blue Jeans with Hippie Hippie Shake. Well, that's good. And now we're getting into the T's, and I don't happen to see either the Trashmen with Surfin' Bird or the 13th Floor Elevators, You're Gonna Miss Me, both of which belong on there, of course. No, instead you get, let's see, James Taylor and television's Little Johnny Jewel, perhaps their most obscure song, the one that never managed to get on either of their two excellent albums. But, you know, like Marquee Moon, for example, might have been a more appropriate choice. They can't win, can they? When they pick the really obscure stuff, I fault them. And when they fail to, I fault them. I mean, you know, it's a double bind, right? Sister Rosetta Tharpe's This Train, and Willie Mae Big Mama Thornton's Ball and Chain and Hound Dog. Well, okay, Big Mama kind of belongs on there, I suppose. But then Pressure Drop by Toots and the Maytals, and Peter Tosh's Legalize It, and the Tramps' Disco Inferno. Sure, yeah, okay, anything you say. The Turtles' It Ain't Me, Babe. Now, this is a band that basically made a career of parodying rock and roll, and you'd think that there would be any of a number of songs that they've done which were more appropriate than their cover of a Bob Dylan song, It Ain't Me, Babe. But somehow the Solons at the Rock and Roll Academy failed to observe this, so forget it. No Richard and Linda Thompson, of course. No, that would be far too modern and up to date. And no Surfin' Bird by the Trashmen. No, we can't pick any songs that are actually good. Instead, we have to have like U2, right? And they don't even pick the one that like might have made sense, which was I Ran. No, instead it's Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, Pride in the Name of Love, and Sunday Bloody Sunday. You know, this sort of hysterical, semi-anthemic nonsense. Right up there with Bruce Springsteen. What is it with the 80s and anthems anyway? And there's nothing about the 80s that I could feel particularly proud of, to tell you the truth. Let's say Van Halen, Jump, slathered with synthesizers, enough to make me jump out of my skin. We're getting to the end now. War and Slipping into Darkness, but not The World as a Ghetto or Lowrider, which would have made more sense. Clara Ward and the Ward Singers with How I Got Over, and Dinah Washington, you know, the great rock and rollers, and the Weavers with the Lead Belly classic Goodnight Irene. The Who. Now here's what I can't figure out. Of like dozens of songs, they pick Baba O'Reilly, one of my favorites, and My Generation obviously belongs on here, but then Go to the Mirror Boy? I don't know who on earth was responsible for this. Oh, you know, they could have picked something like Extra Extra Read All About It, Pinball Wizard and the Miracle Cure, I mean, for a shorter Who song. Anyway, I don't know. Chuck Willis, you know, some good stuff here now. X, Los Angeles, all right. The one good song they did. But then only one Yardbird song, Shape of Things, not I'm a Man, or Over, Under, Sideways, Down, or anything really good, or Yes with Roundabout instead of Long Distance Run Around, or I've Seen All Good People, or We Have Heaven, or, you know, anything. 3 Neil Young songs, including My, Hey, Hey, Out of the Blue, instead of Hey, Hey, My, Into the Black, which might have made more sense as a rock and roll song. And finally, ZZ Top with Legs, right? Not LaGrange. which you know, obviously is like the ZZ Top song. And what else did they manage to miss? Not one song by Wire, not one song by XTC, not one song by The Zombies, or for that matter, Argent, or for that matter, Roy Wood, or for that matter, any of a number of people. No George Harrison songs, you know, nothing. I mean, what's going on here? Tell me, what's going on? Anyway, that's the wrong hero, and I suppose I've said enough about my selections for the Wrong Heroes Rock and Roll Hall of Shame. So I'll be leaving you now. Goodbye. The following is a Wrong Hero presentation of The Unmaking of Sergeant Pepper. Kindly ignore that screen. Everything here is happening backwards, kind of, which is to say, I'm writing mediocre pop songs now. I mean, but that's okay, because after all, what can you do after you've been in the Beatles for as many years as me, right? I mean, nothing really, right? And what happened was, you know, when we did A Day in the Life, all the trumpet players were drunk. Hi, I'm Ringo. You know, I actually did some pretty good drumming for this band, but nobody really gives me any credit. They just assume that I'm some sort of guy who would have been a hairdresser if he didn't get very lucky at a very crucial moment. And, you know, that's still kind of galling to me, actually. I don't really like being thought of as merely the Beatles drummer, although when you think about it, the only reason I'm famous is because I was in the Beatles, right? I mean, nothing I did after that was any good. Yes, it's wonderful, simply wonderful. Of course, you know, I had so much to do with the making or unmaking of Sergeant Pepper that, of course, I'm going to sit here. I'm George. I'm posing with a sitar off to the corner, which is to signify my interest in Indian music. You know, if it weren't for me, George Harrison, there wouldn't be Indian restaurants. And we would never have, and there wouldn't be any transcendental meditation either, for that matter. And I wouldn't have come out with that big, I mean, it was a really great song. It's just a pity that they didn't follow through with their original intention of making an album about their great childhood, like Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane was supposed to be the first two tracks, but then the record company said, oh, no, you gotta have a song out. And so, in fact, we did in fact release those before the album, and really they belonged on the album, but back then, of course, with the primitive technology we had, albums had to be about 45 minutes long. So, anyway, John wanted to do something typically Leonard-esque, which is to have a song in two different keys, and well, you know, I fiddled around with the control console, and I got those sinister tape heads rolling, and before you know it, the BU meter was peaking into the red zone, but I didn't really care, because after all, my name was going to be on the record, but no one was going to think that I had anything to do with this, because pop fans are incredibly ignorant, as we all know. And I'm a classical buff myself. Every once and then, now and again, I'll listen to some jazz, but really, classical music is my forte. And so I managed to throw a bunch of classical influences onto the album for the boys. And, well, I wanted to have a bit more influence with them than I actually had at the time. Now, you know, I'd already played piano on some of their songs. And you know, I did the sort of stuff that a real musician does for them. And well, nobody really gave me any credit for it, but you can't really blame them after all. I mean, again, what they really wanted to make, you know, was an opera. But they never listened to operas, and you know, this is 1967, and everyone was saying, kill the pigs, and then the boys came up with the idea of an opera. And, you know, Hitler was supposed to be on the cover of Sgt. Pepper, which would have been great because, well, as you know, or may know, John Lennon once said that the Beatles were like Hitler, and that you don't get that way without stepping on everybody in town. So, anyway, now, here's an interesting question. Was the crescendo at the end of A Day in the Life actually supposed to represent the atomic bomb? Well, it's difficult to say. Even though I was there at the studio and sort of
cheering the musicians on to get up at the end of those 15 bars and get to their highest note. Even though Paul claims he's the one that he suggested all this, of course it was me, because I was the guy at the console here. I mean, as you can see, I'm shown prominently fiddling with the Beatles' raw footage there and making it into something marketable. No, really, no, George doesn't really have it right at all. To tell you the truth, it was my idea to have that thing at the end of Day in the Life, and I even had cameras there, and I could show you the footage, although we're not going to bother to, and I could prove it, but, I'm not going to, when we first got together, we were like, we were washing a sea of beer and amphetamines, and we did several gigs a night, and every night for a couple of years, until George was deported for being underage, that is, and at first John controlled the group, and most of the singles that he came out with in the first few years of our recording career were in fact John's, but yes, that's right, John was the guy. John controlled the group. It's too bad he's not around today to defend himself, but then again, given what he was doing in 1980, John probably would be sitting there with a drool cup nodding his head every now and then. I'm the only one that's coherent and lucid, and that's because of my wife's vegetarian food. Even though it's very high in fat, and we've had to pull some of it off of the market because it misrepresented itself, I must say in defense of my wife, she played a pretty mean tambourine on all those Wings albums that we put out, and she looked pretty in the back of a piano, even though the piano wasn't mic'd or connected to the soundboard in any way. And look, we got classical musicians. That must mean we're really classy now, huh? Well, that was actually me. I was actually able to play that because I'm a classically trained musician. And my name is David Mason. And, Paul, he sort of suggested what I should do, but I'm the one who actually wrote the notes. So there's a pretty valid case to be made that I was actually one of the composers of Penny Lane. When you come right down to it, yes, we're still on those first two songs, Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields. We haven't even gotten to talking about Sgt. Pepper yet. Look at me, I'm playing the horn. I can still play the same notes, note perfect, even 25 years later. Look, and I'm posing in front of the music that I put together for this song of his, which he says is his. But since I wrote the most important part, obviously it's a joint collaboration between himself and me. Now, the reason that Strawberry Lanes and Penny Fields didn't get in that album, I don't know, the industry weasels, yeah, it was their fault. They did it. I had nothing to do with it. I wanted it to be on the record. Honest, I did. And, it's too bad that we really should have put it on the record. It belonged on here. And guess what? This guy, it's this guy's fault. He's the guy. That's why it didn't go to #1. And we went through all that trouble to yank the single out of the context of the album that it was supposed to serve as the centerpiece for, just so we could make some extra money and satisfy the record company. And then this guy manages to keep it out of the #1 slot. Now, how do you like that, huh? If we really wanted to redress this great injustice, we reissue Sgt. Pepper with the 2 tracks that are missing, and maybe also throw on one of the best takes of Not Guilty, the George Harrison outtake, to boot, just for an added treat. I bet you that's still sitting in the can. Did you know we did 103 takes for that? Isn't that incredible? 103 takes, and it still wasn't worth putting out. Well, and if I'd had my way, I would have just done it as an acoustic number like I did on my 1979 self-titled solo album, George Harrison. However, Paul was running things. Yes, I was running things. None of my extravagant hand gestures. That's because of the time I spent in Italy. I sort of picked things up from the natives there. And anyway, John, George, Ringo, forget them. I'm the guy that really put Sgt. Pepper together. Like I was saying, it was always John, John, John. That's right, it was John. He was my pal. We even co-wrote songs together, although I was never credited. It was always McCartney, Lennon for the first, 10 singles or so, and then it became Lennon McCartney, and I had a lot to do with that, of course. And, well, what about me, huh? did. How do you like that? Well, we were just going to make another Beatles album, and then we decided, hey, I know, we'll pretend like it's art, and all the suckers will eat it up. Yeah, so that's what we did. We got together, and you know, we took a little vacation. When we came back, we had all these great ideas, like putting Mick Jagger's head made out of bronze. Like we wanted to have Hitler on it, but we couldn't get the rights. You know, the Hitler estate, they were very reluctant to release those rights. Now, everything about Sgt. Pepper was like magical because we said it was, not because there was any actual magic going on there. So, anyway, it was sort of the equivalent of New Age music, but of course this was 1967, and in spite of the fact that we were trendsetters, we never really. Okay, Paul, enough already. Well, anyway, here I am at the console with that real tape, showing how technical I am. See? Look at me. Isn't this great? We plugged it right into the direct box, this guitar, you know, and it was really, it was sensational. Just wait till you hear it. Of course you can't hear it because, well, we decided not to play this part. So, I'm so very sorry, boss. You can't actually hear any of this music because it's copyrighted. In fact, this whole enterprise is kind of dubious because the footage is also copyrighted. But since showing it negative constitutes fiddling with it to the degree that I can acceptably make it a non-copyrighted work of art, copyrighted to the wrong hero, I can get away with it. But sorry, we can't have any of the music. It's a shame, but you know this music by now. Just think of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the opening part, right? And here are the Beatles singing en chorale without any augmented instrumentation. I'm sure you've seen this documentary. Well, if not, you'll probably see it again and again and again. You know, the Beatles, they're really big now. How do you like that? You know, they were first together in like 1959, 1960, and here it is, 35 years, 36 years later, and they're still the toppermost of the poppermost, in the eloquent words of John Lennon. Well, here we are at the Draft Jury Abbey Road Studios. We've got some tinted film here to make it look a little more Victorian than it actually is, which isn't a very difficult trick. And here we have some fascinating footage of the roof of the Abbey Road Studios, and some council tenements, and well, this must be, gee, Liverpool. Huh. That's pretty appropriate. How do you like that? Liverpool. Hi, we're Liverpool. Hi, I'm holding a white guitar. Look at me, I'm dressed up like a priest. A Spanish priest at that. And now look, here I am in my psychedelic clown suit, along with my pal Ringo, who's wearing a luau. Here I am endorsing Miller beer. I must be in America in that shot. There's George, looking typically morbid. You know, the guy has no sense of humor. That's why he put out all those films like Brazil. He wanted to prove to the world that, although he had no sense of humor, he had nothing against humor per se. Here I am with my Elvis Presley mutton chops or sideburns. You know, John was really kind of off his rocker when we did Sgt. Pepper. It was mostly Paul's work, I hate to admit it. Oh, and mine as well, of course. Now, the thing about Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, now, John, again and again, John says, oh no, it has nothing to do with LSD, and yet, the imagery, if you just listen to the words of the song, not that they make any sense, mind you, but it's just like, the thing is, John Lennon's kid, Julian, he was very talented, he was like a miniature Chagall, that's right. I don't know that I know who this Chagall fellow is. In fact, I'm just an ordinary fellow. I just want my bankers and beer, and I'd be happy. And I'm wearing my trademark rings, even though it's been like, about 25 years since I was known as Ringo. And here I am wearing a very sophisticated looking vest and my white shirt, no tie, of course. Here we are in black and white with the gatefold sleeve to the completed album, even though this is supposed to be about the making of the album. Now, let me show you. I can play the piano. And it's a very simple composition, really, especially for somebody who's classically trained like me. And, you know, it sounds a bit classical, yes. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, the piano riff, it's not really very sophisticated, yet it's ineffably lovely all the same. Yes, the man has very great compositional gifts, and it took a real genius, of course, like me, in order to fully produce this sort of thing. You know, it was almost like he was going through the alphabet and picking out letters at random to play on the piano, and yet I made it into a work of art. See, just to show that there's no lasting enmity between us. Even though I've never had anything to do with anything that Paul has done for the last 25 years. This is the first time we've been together since 1970, to tell you the truth. You couldn't get me. Sorry about that. I'd like very much to have helped him out with some of his songs. You can see that Paul's output after the Beatles broke up was really dreary and terrible because I had nothing to do with it, of course. And that's basically what happened. This is very interesting. You know, on the Sgt. Pepper album, did I mention this before? This is really, I don't know. I'm not sure I can say anything more about Sgt. Pepper right now. Except, see, George isn't the only one that can fart around with the control board. Hey, look, some more footage of hippies dancing. Wow, this must be the 60s, man. You can tell because not only are they dancing in a field full of cow shit, but they're dancing barefoot, completely ignorant of the risks. Hi, it's me again. As you can see, although I'm wearing a Mr. Rogers-like sweater and a white shirt, I too am anti-establishment and do not wear a tie. Of course, it would diminish my vocal range, my mumbling, muttering, and somewhat pausing delivery. If I were to, in fact, wear a tie, it would constrict my vocal cords, and I couldn't get those beefy baritone tones from my throat box. And you know, since we slept until about 5 in the afternoon, we basically wrote our songs in the afternoon. And well, now there's still something about Sgt. Pepper people don't understand. See, people thought that John wrote the lyrics and I wrote the songs, but actually, I wrote all the songs and the lyrics too, see? Well, here's the thing. John and Paul, they were great, and they thought they were kings of the world, and, well, it was really too bad. Yeah, so it really was really too bad, because I was actually the king of the world. I didn't need John Lennon. John Lennon was just excess baggage as far as I'm concerned. Oh, and by the way, that fellow that wrote that biography of me, Jeffrey Giuliano, he wrote this thing called Blackbird, and I don't know, some say it was a rather frank study of me. I think it's all lies. All lies, I say. I'm not a megalomaniac, and I will hunt down and kill anyone who says I am. Well, Paul wrote lots of songs. And the thing is, you know, get by with a little help from my friends, there's just 5 notes. How do you like that, huh? I mean, it's like he was just sitting at the piano, fiddling and diddling, and he came up with these 5 notes, and he wrote a whole song about them. And of course he figures, well, since it's only 5 notes, we'll give it to Ringo. Here I am in front of my incredibly primitive recording technology, once again showing that I, George Martin, was the mastermind behind much of Sgt. Pepper. Unlike popular opinion has it, of course, that the Beatles wrote the songs, but actually it was me that put everything together. And there's poor Ringo, hapless Ringo, and then there's Genius John, Genius is Payne Lennon, and I didn't want people saying, would you stand up and throw tomatoes at me? No, that wouldn't have sounded right. It didn't really scan. Actually, Hunter Davis has a very interesting anecdote about the writing of that song, Get By With a Little Help From My Friends. John's wife tried to chip in with some lyrics, but John and Paul rather brutally shut her out, because of course they were northern men and male chauvinists. Well, as you can see here, the Beatles are just a little off-key in their backing vocals there, but since Ringo is singing at that mournful hound dog baritone of his, it doesn't really matter. Nobody really notices because I was able to jazz it up with recording effects. You know, I was worried about my vocals because, quite frankly, they stank, you know, when it comes right down to it. And there's not an awful lot I can do, vocally anyway. In fact, I had no business. And in fact, the Beatles didn't need me because they were all drummers themselves. They all could play drums, and all they did was tell me what to do. Well, anyway, it sure is really nice being a producer. Look, there's me, and there's some other guy with Vaseline in his hair, and there's a picture of a hand. That must be, I forget his name though. And, well, anyway, as you can see, I made a bundle of money from being involved with the Beatles. And you know, after the Beatles, there weren't very many other challenges. So I decided to take up with a rock group, which I figured would be as big as the Beatles, America. Well, once again, here I am. I'm growing a little bit pudgy. My eyes are so big and googly, you could probably pop them with a pin. Well, I haven't aged very well. In fact, I look somewhat like someone's gardener or a character from Nobody's Fool, the Paul Newman movie set in upstate New York. Yes, I sort of look like a dreary sort of janitor or something. But of course, you know, well, George Harrison really ran things. It's not heresy for me to say this because there's nobody around to stop me. And of course, even the few royalties I got from the Beatles have made me incredibly wealthy. You know that I only collaborated on 2 songs and only wrote 1 song for the entire output of the Beatles, which, as I recall, numbers, let's see, how many official recorded songs did the Beatles have? 186. Well, anyway. 3 out of 186, that's about a little less than 2% of their entire recorded output. Well, what about me? I had all these great songs. Frank Sinatra said that Something was a great song. And I got to hang out with all these incredibly famous Indian musicians, and yet nobody gives me any credit for running Something, which Frank Sinatra said was one of the greatest songs, the greatest love ballad of the 20th century. That's what he called it. You know, I could have put that on Sgt. Pepper, but I didn't. See, I was saving it, because I figured I'd wait until the Beatles were just about to break up, and then I'd stick it on Abbey Road, and it would be the one really great song on Abbey Road, and everybody would say what a great genius George is, and I'd sell more copies of my 3-album set, All Things Must Pass. You know, I shouldn't have used up all my great songs on All Things Must Pass. I should have, held some of them for Living in the Material World, because, you know, that album kind of bit the bag. I even had to, write Within You, Without You. You know, Not Guilty really belonged on Sgt. Pepper, but I had to come up with Within You, Without You because the boys sabotaged my 103 takes and couldn't get it right. And, you know, that noise of them laughing at the end of Within You, Without You, that's not the Beatles laughing. It's a good song, I tell you. It's a good song. Okay, so it drones on at an interminable length, but you do have to admit that it comes to a really great climax. And here's the thing. I had, violins. Now, you know, Eleanor Rigby had violins, but these were Indian violins. So, this is really great, because, you know, it shows how cosmopolitan the Beatles were, and if it weren't for me, of course, they wouldn't be very cosmopolitan at all, would they? See, there's the thing. Right here in the store, East, you know, all those Indian novelty stores, and Crate and Barrel, and all that, if it weren't for George Harrison and me, George Martin, then we wouldn't even have any of those stores. In fact, nobody would know the first thing about anything. Indian music, Indian movies, Indian cuisine, forget it. There wouldn't be anything. That would be totally off the chart. Of course, you know, we're Britain, and British people, we colonized India, so really we were responsible for India in its modern day state. As a matter of fact, the Beatles invented India. Or at least if the Beatles didn't invent India, they would have had to for this album, you see. This is what we're getting at. The Beatles basically did everything, all right? If it weren't for the Beatles, the 1960s would have been skipped altogether. We would have gone from the 1950s to the 1970s, which, in some respects, we did. The 60s were an enormous aberration. The Beatles created decade. And if it weren't for the Beatles, then we would have gone straight from, doo-wop music to sha-na-na. We would have gone straight from Ozzy and Harriet to Happy Days. But the 60s, see, if it weren't for the 60s, then we wouldn't have all those great shows like Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie and Hogan's Heroes and My Mother in the Car and Dennis the Menace. Well, that's true. The Beatles did invent the 60s. I think it's fair to say that I personally was responsible for inventing the country of India, which, as you may know, has about 20% of the world's people now. And yet it didn't exist. Now, we got to give the Beach Boys a little bit of credit. I suppose they invented the early 60s, and we sort of took everything they did and made it much better. And so we fixed it up, in other words. And you know, Brian Wilson, he was a great genius, even though he was tone deaf in one ear and deaf in the other. And his father was a mean man. And wow, this must be Oh, Brian Wilson, he was great. We really should have brought him into the studio instead of George Harrison because he had all the really great ideas. In fact, I must admit, we stole just about everything we possibly could from Pet Sounds. Like the animal noises at the end of Good Morning. Well, of course, that was the coda of Caroline No. And, yeah, that's right. Everything was mine. Why do I sing? Well, the Beach Boys, it's not fair to compare them with the Beatles because they had much more, they had superior recording equipment. Abbey Road was a dump, to tell you the truth. EMI Studios, they were cheapskates. What they were able to do with that incredibly sophisticated recording technology totally blew us out of the water, but you'll never know it. And now we have one of those really quaint British acts, all harmonicas. How do you like that? And then the bearded guy in the corner snapping his fingers. He's sort of window dressing. That's for the beatnik crowd. The Morton Fraser Harmonica Band. They were a big thing back then. And I would have loved to have had those playing on our album too. But, even though we're the Beatles and we're practically like God, we couldn't afford to do that. You see, the budget wouldn't permit it. We went way over budget on Sgt. Pepper, as you're probably well aware. And the thing is with EMI, it smelled so bad in there that they couldn't tell we were blowing pot in the bathrooms and anywhere else we could. Well, now, we just as much as we stole from the Beach Boys, we also took stuff from all this weird stuff on TV, and we wrote an entire song based around a circus poster, and I would like to say that I had something to do with the writing of The Benefit of Mr. Kite, but actually I didn't. Not one word. And it was really great. He had this incredible circus poster here, and he just took the words and just sort of diddle around them, just like I diddle around their music, and it's just amazing what I was able to do, because I'm the great George Harrison, Martin, and I'm the great George Harrison, you're the great George Martin. Yeah, so, anyway, I really should do something about those eyebrows of mine. Don't they make me look rather sinister? And my hairdresser, maybe I have Ringo touch me up a little bit. I got split ends, and well, basically, John dressed up in a priest outfit. He looked like a Hispanic priest, and he wanted to basically write a circus song that was about the church, or the church song that was about the circus, or whatever. Well, I obliged him, as I always do, even though he was totally addled with drugs, and well, if he wanted to have a song which was so circusy that you could smell the sawdust, well, it was my job to break up all the furniture in the EMI studios and give him what he wanted. My sole role, even though I claimed that I wrote much of Sgt. Pepper, it was basically just to keep the boys happy. They liked the way I made meat pies, and so I would bring them those, and I brew their tea for them. We British are very serious about our tea, as you might be well aware. And, well, here I am at the console just to show you how important I was to the making of Sgt. Pepper. Just incredible, don't you think? Or don't you? Once again, I'm cutting out the music here. I'm just playing the vocals. And, I had more to do with the writing of The Benefit of Mr. Kite than any of those folks. They wanted me to do some crazy stuff with, getting all this organ music and chopping it together and putting it back together, throwing it up in the air, and putting it back together again. And well, I obliged them, but unfortunately, when we threw it up in the air, it all came back pretty much the same way that we'd thrown it up in to begin with. Now, we had a hurdy-gurdy going, and Donovan wasn't very happy about that because, of course, it was he who wrote the hurdy-gurdy band. Now, if we had put out Sgt. Pepper in the order that the songs were recorded, the running order would have been Strawberry Fields, 164, Penny Lane, A Day in the Life, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Good Morning, Fixing a Hole, Only a Northern Song, which was a Sgt. Pepper outtake, Ignore this man. He's Phil Collins. He had nothing to do with anything. Being for the benefit of Mr. Kite, lovely Rita, loosing the sky with diamonds, getting better, and within you, without you, she's leaving home with a little help from my friends and the reprise Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. That would have been the actual running order. Well, hi, I'm John Lennon, and I like to obsessively watch television virtually all the time. It was very important to me at that stage, even though, yes, it was very important to John to have the television. Well, it's odd, you know, Lennon would watch so much television that he even had leakage from stupid British sitcoms and Meet the Wife, for example. It's time for tea and Meet the Wife. See, once again, there's the tea motif and the television. You know, I think actually Good Morning was probably the best song on the entire thing. And that's because it was, along with the benefit of Mr. Kite, the one song that I had the most to do with. Now, what else can I say about Good Morning, Good Morning? Now, he had all these animals in there, and what we don't mention, of course, is that he got the idea from the Beach Boys. Because that would be somewhat day-class saying. He's not around to defend himself, after all. I really can't seem to find any more data about Good Morning in here. And I know it's got to be in here somewhere. Maybe he wrote it a lot earlier than... Oh, here we go. Well, you know, John Lennon called Good Morning a throwaway piece of garbage. But actually, it was his answer song to Good Day Sunshine. Well, you know, I had a good deal to do with the clumsy guitars and the clumsy drumming and those big smashing cymbals. You know, if I ever earned my money for this band, then it was on this track, because really, I really had to sweat. Those congas, they're not easy to play, and those gigantic cymbal crashes, those are really great. And you know, only I could have come up with that rhythmically unruly backing track to Good Morning, Good Morning. I don't think they could have gotten anyone else. No, we probably couldn't have gotten anybody else. We had a lot of problems because we really lost the knack of writing singles. So what we did was, we figured we'd put out an entire album which would sell like a single, and in that way we would increase the hegemony of the Beatles. As you can see, I'm here in my shiny blue suit, and Ringo's in his red suit, and George is in his orange suit. And there's all these people in the background, and what we're doing basically is equating our greatness with theirs. I mean, you know, it's supposed to be a tribute, but that's just a sneaky way of saying we're just as great as Einstein. We're the Einsteins of rock and roll. Well, you know, some people said that the song Fixing a Hole was actually about heroin. You know, a hole in your arm, and you put the needle in it and you fix it. Well, no, I don't think that had anything to do with heroin per se. And, as for the cover of Sgt. Pepper, well, first we shot it in black and white, see, and Dylan Thomas managed to make it on there, even though I don't think the boys really went in much for lifted pinky type poetry and whatnot. Anyway, yes. Oh, I don't know. We just figured we'd throw something together at the last minute. And, well, getting back to Fixing a Hole. Well, you know that song Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys. It's rather similar to Good Vibrations, and there's certain similarities to a song like our own Nowhere Man as well. Anyway, John ran the group for the longest time, and then when Paul had his chance to take over again, well, he certainly did. And Sgt. Pepper, Paul had a lot to do with that. It was his idea, it was his execution, and You know, John had a lot to do with furthering communist aggression into China and weakening the will of the United States to resist. And, of course, Hanoi gave them their Medal of Honor. Well, it's really too bad. Well, you know, I'm still incredibly touched by that. It took me to put it all together. And to tell you the truth, that song should be credited to Lennon, McCartney, and George Martin. But, of course, it isn't. Now, some people say, George Martin, how can you claim to have written so much of the Beatles material for them when your own contributions, which ended up on side B of Yellow Submarine, were so palpably mediocre? Now, all I have to say to that is, well, well, we didn't know quite how we were going to be able to put all these different things together. So we just sort of fiddled and diddled around with it for a long time. And, you know, we just sort of slapped things together. Random, the boys called it. Just throw stuff up in the air and see where it lands and put it together because and they called it random. And the boys were so convinced that everything they did had the Midas touch that they figured that they'd be able to put it together later, of course, with my help. Now, you don't know how trying it is to have a band which, instead of going into the studio with finished product, elected instead to simply write the songs in the studio, all that studio time, which we could have used to better effect with other artists who were patiently waiting their turn. But, well, what can you do? And now here we have the incredible crescendo to Sgt. Pepper, the Day in the Life crescendo. Yes, I'm still very pleased with my work on that particular song, as you can see. Well, you know, Sgt. Pepper, basically it was an album which, by dint of their saying, was a concept album, became a concept album. Although nobody's ever really said to my satisfaction exactly what a concept album really constitutes, unless it's an album written around one idea, which sort of like getting an album for the price of a single, or a single type concept spread out over an entire album. Well, you know, I think it's time for me to go up and sweep up the hedgerows in the back of my house here, because I like people thinking that I'm simply nothing more than a gardener on the Harrison estate. Oh, the burdens of stardom, they're so great. I wish I wasn't famous. I really wish. And you can tell by the casual way in which I sit. Well, you know, I must say, celebrityhood, I wouldn't mind a little bit of celebrity here myself. I mean, people know that I'm George Martin, right? But when they see me on the street, they don't necessarily say, look, there's George Martin. He was the fifth Beatle. Now, you know, I fancy a little bit of that, actually. I really wouldn't mind people saying, look, there's the great George Martin who wrote all the Beatles songs. George Martin's full of crap. He didn't write anything. He thinks he did. But, you know, he's just a big slag. He just sat around the house, did nothing. Basically, I'm George Martin. So that's all he does. He just goes, he gets the side of his head. Says, I'm George Martin. Well, anyway, this was an awfully fun time we had here, deconstructing Sgt. Pepper in the unmaking of Sgt. Pepper. I'm afraid that even though we did use original footage from somebody else's creative work, well, we're going to still say that it was our product because we did all the voiceovers and stuff. So we have to roll these credits for the actual pictorial content of it. Just so we don't get into trouble with the Disney people. Now, when they find out about this, they're going to be really angry and upset. So, please, whatever you do, don't tell them. regalia so that we might discuss the consequences. Well, hi, I'm the wrong hero, back, at least momentarily. Now, I'm warning you, if the Disney people and the Beatles find out about this, they'll have my head, especially the latter portion of this broadcast. I'd like to show you some of the books that were used in the making of the unmaking of Sgt. Pepper, as well as other portions of our programming. A Day in the Life, The Music and Artistry of the Beatles by Mark Hertzog. Revolution in the Head, The Beatles Recordings in the 60s by Ian MacDonald. The Lost Beatles Interviews by Jeffrey Giuliano. Rare Records, Wax Trash and Vinyl Treasures by Tom Hibbert. The Acid Trip, A Complete Guide to Psychedelic Music. Now this one's written by Vernon Joinson. Rock and Roll Confidential Report by Dave Marsh and the editors of Rock and Roll Confidential. Rock and Roll Babylon. This is actually kind of a trashy book. It's by Gary Herman, but nevertheless, it was of some use. Early Rockers by Howard Elson. Let's see. The British Invasion by Nicholas Schaffner. San Francisco Nights, The Psychedelic Music Trip, 1965 to 1968 by Gene Sculotti and David C.A. That's a pretty psychedelic name right there. And of course, the Beatles recording sessions, the official Abbey Road Studio session notes by Mark Lewisone. This is the book, really. That and Revolution in the Head. In addition, I've drawn upon sources such as the girl group book by Alan Betrock, The Story of Motown by Peter Benjaminson, Dick Clark's The First 25 Years of Rock and Roll, the 1988 The New Wave Punk Rock Explosion by Caroline Coon, The New Rock and Roll by Stuart Cope and Glenn A. Baker, the Rolling Stone Encyclopedia of Rock and Roll, the New Rolling Stone Record Guide, the first edition of the Rolling Stone Record Guide, the Rolling Stone History of Rock and Roll, the Ballad of John and Yoko by the editors of Rolling Stone, the Kinks Chronicles by, what is that guy's name? John Mendelsohn, The Devil's Music, which is a story of the blues, Mystery Train by Grill Marcus, You're So Cold, I'm Turning Blue, which is a book about country and western by Martha Hume, The Music of Black Americans by Eileen Southern, and let's see, I've gotten a lot of fun reading Rock Bottom by Monk Raker, and Rock and Roll Confidential by Penny Stallings, and of course Chuck Eddy's Stairway to Hell, which is of course about heavy metal music. Anyway, I'm the wrong hero, and this has been a great deal of fun, and I certainly hope you enjoyed this presentation. Hi, I'm the wrong hero, and in the few minutes which remain, I think I would like to say a little something about what I feel rock and roll's place in history will be. Well, it could well be that someday literature will be taught utilizing the Beatles song Nowhere Man, and elocution will be taught utilizing the Buddy Holly song Peggy Sue, and geography will be taught with the Rolling Stones songs 2,000 Light Years from Home and In Another Land, to say nothing of Penny Lane or Strawberry Fields. And it could well be as well that rock and roll records will become a form of sacred text for people of the far future.
And of those sacred texts, perhaps books such as The Rockin' Fifties and Fortunate Son by Dave Marsh, or The Age of Rock, and 20-Minute Fandangos and Forever Changes, both edited by Jonathan Eisen, and the Gaines book Heroes and Villains, and Goldman's Elvis and the Lives of John Lennon, and Martianstein's The Book of Rock Lists, and Meltzer's The Aesthetics of Rock and Culture will all be the sacred texts of such a religion founded upon rock and roll. However, it doesn't seem likely. However, people are hungry for songs which retain elements of classic religiosity, hence the gigantic revival in the Benedictine monk, the monastic chanting, which took place somewhat recently, which a friend of mine back in the 70s predicted would happen. So it came as quite a surprise when this prediction was actually borne out in fact. But let's face it, people have no faith in religion per se. People aren't too sure what to think about science. Television shows are repetitive, and the content of movies is strictly controlled, to the extent that not just anybody can write a movie script and see it produced, because movies are a gigantic and enormous investment in time and labor and most of all money. So the real people's medium is in fact popular music, and more specifically rock and roll music. And to that degree, people have put their trust in this medium, that of the popular song, over and above other formats. Time was when a man wanted to say something to a large crowd of people. Say Thomas Paine, he wrote an essay and published it in the form of a pamphlet, for example, Common Sense, which at the time of the American Revolution was the largest selling such production to date. However, some few hundred years later, if you really have something to say, then generally you attempt to encapsulate it into the format of a popular song in order for it to reach its widest impact. And in fact, as that famous saying goes, let me write the songs of a nation, and I care not who writes its laws. It's very much true today as well. So when I go on at length about popular music and treat it with a certain amount of seriousness, it's not entirely out of a sense of misproportion. Popular music is extraordinarily important. So are motion pictures, television shows, advertisements, comic books, magazines. Everything is important in its way. And for that matter, even important things are important, although perhaps not quite as important as they believe themselves to be. So if the trivial is more important than people commonly take it to be, and important things are less important, then perhaps I have done my part in creating a medium by which this discrepancy can be addressed and to some degrees alleviated, if not in fact wholly ameliorated. How do you like them fancy $3 words, huh? Well, I've had an enormous amount of fun doing this. I certainly hope that you enjoyed listening and watching this as much as I enjoyed putting it together, which would mean that you're totally miserable right now. No, actually, it was fun. I'd like you to know that this entire production was shot in 2 days, and it's unlikely that I will put together something like this in such a hurry in the future. It has its upsides and its downsides, is what I'm getting at. Many of the things I do take months to put together, from format to finished product. However, This one was a natural. It stemmed from a newspaper reprint of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's top 250 songs, and it sort of billowed out from there. So I'm the wrong hero, and I imagine that my time is just about out, so